Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar All Together Now about live remote choral performance in the age of social distancing. My name is Scot Hanna-Weir, and I'm the Director of Choral Activities at Santa Clara University. And I am so delighted to be joined by three heroes in the live remote field, all associated with C4, a really brilliant and creative ensemble in New York that combines composers and conductors together to make new music for the choral idiom. And they have been particularly innovative here in the space of COVID-19 where we're not able to gather in person. And so I want to thank them for joining me, and I hope that everybody here today gets a lot out of this webinar. We're going to be sharing some of our experience. We've all been a part of live performances using software to gather people from all over the country together to sing live in performance over the internet. And so we're excited to share our experience with you. We are tremendously grateful to all of our hosts of this event, a consortium of different ACDA groups, the National Organization of American Choral Directors Association, the Northwest Region, the Western Region, as well as New Jersey ACDA, and of course to C4 and Santa Clara University, the ensembles and organizations that are represented here today. I would just like to, I've already mentioned who we are, and you're going to get to hear from all of us as we speak throughout the webinar. But if you have questions, I'm mostly going to be monitoring the chat, and I would love for you to go ahead and put information that you want answers to in the chat. And we've tried to structure the webinar so that we'll have plenty of time to answer some questions. And also our emails are available in the resource document that is linked in the description of the YouTube video that you're watching right now, as well as links to all kinds of things that we'll be talking about. So don't think of this as just a one-time resource, but an ongoing thing that you can keep on coming back to, and that we are real live people who are happy to chat with you about our experience and hope you can find a way to be able to make music live with people as well. So without further ado, we're going to kick this off. So I think the first thing that's important for us to distinguish between is that there is a difference between what we're talking about today, live remote choir versus virtual choir. We've seen a lot of amazing examples of virtual choirs, and I've had a lot of experience doing them with my collegiate ensembles. I'll be doing them with my community choir, and they certainly have a place, but they're not an actual live performance. I think us choral educators know that what, an administrator or a pastor in a church context might see as a bunch of people on Zoom in boxes singing together. That's not what it is. It's actually lots of hours of audio and video editing. What we're talking about here today is that there are software that allow you to sing live over the internet with people in real time. And we'll talk about what some of the limitations of those are, but also what some of the advantages and new possibilities of that software are as well. And I'll just make another note to say that when we, Santa Clara University, were getting ready for our performance Embrace the Lag, where we did aleatoric music that didn't need to line up, one of the things that I did was I had my students record a virtual choir version of what we were going to be performing live before we ever even rehearsed it. And so you can create virtual choir recordings, put them together as a finished product, and then also use that as a rehearsal method for your live concerts. And in fact, you could have a live part of your performance and a virtual project that you've done, and maybe some previous recordings or videos of live performances that have happened in the past, and put that all together as one complete concert. So there's lots of possibilities that don't involve doing a hour and a half long live remote concert.
So why do live remote choir? First of all, there's the experience for the singers, which is incredibly valuable. Live remote choir recreates the musical and social experience of singing in a choir, just in a new context. And this is really good for singers' mental health. Personally, my experience of singing with my community again for the first time was really transformative. One youth choir director I'm working with jumped into a live remote commissioning consortium without ever having tried live remote singing because she wants to bring a source of joy to her depressed high school students. And psychotherapist Cynthia Antonio Ciadat has written about the mental health benefits of choir participation and its implications for singers' physical health in the context of the COVID pandemic. So she notes a connection between singing in a chorus and a decrease in loneliness. And she wrote about this recently in the Medium, the link to which is on our resources sheet, which you can find along with all the links that we reference in this webinar in the YouTube description. Then there's the experience for the audience. This is a chance to interact with the performers in the live chat. As you can see, thank you all of you who are shouting out and saying hi. It's a really valuable experience to be able to interact with that chat. And I've even had an audience member tell me that they liked the online performance better than an in-person performance because they're not comfortable going up to the performers after the concert and talking to them. Whereas here, it's really encouraged to ask your questions, interact with the performers. So having a post-concert Q&A is a really great way to take advantage of that.
Another thing that's really great about it is that it feels more like choir for the ensemble that's rehearsing. You actually get to hear other people sing and you're singing with them in real time. A virtual project, which is sort of the other main method that we have right now to make music, only gives you sort of this experience of you send beautiful music into the void, and then months later you might see this incredible product that you're a part of, but you don't have those daily step-by-step or weekly check-ins in terms of how the progress is going. And so it has a tremendous benefit for my singers. One of my college choir singers said, even when we did something poorly, it felt like we were still in choir. And that experience, I think, is transformative, especially at this time.
Now, what can we do in this new medium? We need to find appropriate repertoire. So first, there's asynchronous music. We can incorporate the latency inherent in internet platforms into the artistic product. I have suggestions for aleatoric music that will work well on live remote performance on my website, and that's in the resource sheet. There are also, of course, many aleatoric works out there. The one that is in the image on the left is an excerpt from my own work, Here I Am, which I wrote for live remote choir, and that's a mostly aleatoric piece with some synchronous sustained chords. Solos work very well, and they can be layered over sustained chords. Drones and improvisations are possibilities. You can also create adaptations of non-aleatoric works to create something that can work with the latency of the internet platforms. So for example, C4 adapted Arvo Päre's The Beatitudes, repeating each choral phrase twice and staggering our entrances so that the asynchrony became purposeful. Then there are near synchronous possibilities that are made possible with low latency programs such as Jamulus, and that's the first of the technological approaches. You can use a click track or a pitch track that the audience does not hear to keep the choir together. This is fairly challenging because it asks you to do what you never do as a choir member, which is don't listen to the other singers. Instead, pay attention first and foremost to this click. So this is more of an advanced approach for that reason. Then there's the lead singer approach, which is also a little bit challenging. And that's kind of like a human click track, but more flexible and allows for the use of rubato. This can work with many different textures, but you need to have at least one voice part that's singing continuously throughout to hold everyone together. And in this technique, all the singers follow one lead singer who is then muted from the final mix. And if you're using Jamulus, you can turn everyone else down in your mix so you only hear the lead singer, or at least barely hear everyone else, and really attend just to that lead singer to sing with them. Finally, there is an animated score or electronic track. There are different possibilities for this. This is an image on the right of David C's Hey, Keep in Touch with an animated score that C4 premiered. And the animated scores and the electronic tracks do come with some technical challenges that, of course, can be overcome.
All right, so let's talk about the technological challenges. We'll tell you about our remote live stream technology setup, but there really isn't time to cover all the details. So we'll try to touch upon the most important points. And we've written additional documentation, as Karen mentioned, that we've shared in the description. And that documentation covers everything in great detail. So, slide. Why do we need a technical setup? What is it trying to solve? Why not just use any old standard video conferencing app? And the reason for that is, for making music, we have some specific requirements. Most importantly, we want minimal audio processing. So no echo cancellation, because we're going to be using headphones. No silence detection, no compression. We want to adjust our own gain, right? No speech filters, because we're going to be singing. In addition, we want a high bit rate. We want music optimized, CD quality sound, not telephone optimized, speech optimized sound, right? So if this tech works and if it's doing its job, then it will feel like the entire choir is sitting 6 inches from your ear, singing into your ears at hi-fi quality. And this spatial collapse is one of the primary reasons we'll need to learn to listen and rehearse differently. And that's something that Karen will talk about a little later. Next slide. Okay. So what's an example of such a tech solution? There are a growing number of tools for sharing audio between participants. And after looking at several options, we settled on an app called Jamulus. First of all, it satisfies that high-quality audio requirement that I mentioned on the previous slide. In addition, it also aims to minimize latency, which can be useful for some of the techniques that Karen mentioned. And in theory, it lets up to 50 participants sing together, although we've only tried it with 20. One great feature that we didn't know we needed is that Jamulus lets each singer control their own mix. So a singer can really choose to listen to whoever they think will help them sing their part the best. And finally, Jamulus is free, open source software available for Mac, Windows, Linux, and some Chromebooks. So that makes it widely usable. On the flip side, it's an audio solution. So for video, you'll still need to use some Zoom or some other video capture solution. It requires all the singers to install software rather than just using the browser. And finally, Jamulus uses a central server, which means that it needs a server powerful enough to handle all the singers singing at the same time. In our experience, especially this final point means that you need at least one tech-savvy person in the group who can handle this server setup. There are alternatives to Jamulus, so this I've just described Jamulus here. There are alternatives to Jamulus, and we'd be happy to talk about them if people have questions. In any case, regardless of the software you choose, the basic tasks for setting up the sound are going to be the same, and hopefully your basic audio needs will be met by whatever software you choose. Next. So what does each singer have to do? In this case, it's not too complicated. Whatever you choose, the singer will have to set up their own, set up and configure their own audio station. Everyone will have to download Jamulus for free and point it at the Jamulus server. And everyone will need to connect to Zoom or some other service like Google Meet and connect to that meeting for video. And people generally know how to do this because they've been doing it for a few months now. So it's not hard, but there are many things that can go wrong, and they do. Some singers have Windows, some have Mac, and sometimes some people have something else. Some people's USB microphones don't work. Some need to order special adapters to connect their laptop to the internet using a wired internet connection, and so on. So the issue is that trying to solve all of these problems in a rehearsal will take up all the time. So instead we recommend that you try to plan ahead, and it'd be great if the tech person who's in charge of setting up the server could also go through with each singer one-on-one to troubleshoot the setup before the rehearsal.
Right, so we've covered what each singer has to do. Then there's the engineering setup that does the final live stream. One person, either a singer in the choir or a non-singer that's on your team, will have the task of taking the Zoom video and the Jamulus audio, combining them and streaming them to YouTube. I'm not going to go into the details here, but it can be kind of involved. What you're seeing here is a diagram of my deluxe setup that I have used, with audio and video processing thrown in addition to the normal Jamulus and Zoom. But even a simple setup will take some work. I spend an hour or two before each live stream remembering everything that I have to do and getting the software adjusted properly. But luckily, only one person in the ensemble needs to do this. All right. Remember that many hands make light work. A remote live performance has many moving parts. Some of them are familiar ones like singers and a conductor, but some of them are new problems that you probably didn't have to worry about before. You have to troubleshoot tech problems that crop up at the last minute, sound engineering to make sure that the final mix sounds good, monitoring the live stream to make sure that it's working properly. We discovered that we even needed someone watching the live stream chat to deal with trolls and bots and removing offensive posts. So it can get pretty complicated. It's hard to sing, let alone conduct, and simultaneously think about all these other problems. So although a live stream may not need a box office crew sitting at the back of the venue taking tickets, you have just as much need for non-singers who can take care of these other tasks around you. Make sure that you assemble a team to make the whole thing run smoothly. All right, to make all of this technological stuff easier to figure out, we've created a whole bunch of documents and videos about various technical aspects of remote live streaming with Jamulus. Again, the links will be available in the YouTube video description. We have a bunch of web pages about using Jamulus to do this. We have videos on setting up the engineering and on how to run a Jamulus server on the cloud. And definitely feel free to ask us any technical questions at the end of the presentation.
So we've mentioned a couple of times that listening in this environment is really different. And it's going to vary depending on what your tech setup is. You know, what C4 has done is really push the envelope, and they're using incredibly good and robust tech setups. When I did this with my university choir, we had 4 rehearsals, and then we did a concert in Jamulus. And I had a lot of people who were on Wi-Fi without good microphones, and that was not ideal, but we were still able to make music together. It just required us to listen in a different way. It was part using, like learning to understand headphones and learning to understand how we were able to like sing into a microphone and check levels. And Karen is going to go into all of this in a little bit more detail now, talking about what the actual rehearsal process is like for the singers.
So as you'd expect, rehearsing a live remote choir is quite different from rehearsing in person. There are some new challenges, some of which were surprising to us. First of which is intonation. So new slide, please, Scott. The magic of a section matching pitch by instinct just doesn't happen as naturally online. I'm not exactly sure why, but it's just it's a different feel, and you need more attention from the singers and from the conductor or rehearsal leader to achieve the same results that happen quite easily in person. Even with singers who are at a very high level and usually have no problem with things like intonation and blend. So let the mic do the work for you is one thing that helps. You have to adjust your levels so that your own voice doesn't overpower what you're hearing through the headphones. And so that helps, one, if the singer is not singing too loud compared to what they're hearing, but also on the flip side, the singer has to make sure that they can hear all the other singers. And I'll go into all of that with levels and listening in a little bit. For blend, achieving a good blend is also more difficult online. So one thing that helps is going back to basics. Focus on the vowel. Some of the same techniques that you use in in-person rehearsals will work online. It just needs more attention. So focusing on having exactly the same vowel repeatedly for blend is very helpful. A technique that we've taken from in-person rehearsal that's useful is having specific singers to follow, having singer leaders within the section. So if everyone is told to follow the intonation, follow the blend or tone of a specific singer in their section, that helps a lot. No matter what pitch that singer is singing, that's the correct pitch that everyone else needs to sing. All of a sudden, it fixes the problem of not matching pitch. So that is just one solution that we found useful. You can also rotate the singers from piece to piece or section to section. It doesn't always have to be the same person. Anyway, that's one technique we found useful. I'm sure you will discover many more through experimentation. Finally, conducting or not conducting. The conductor's role is very different now. You're more of a rehearsal leader than someone who waves your arms around. Waving your arms isn't actually helpful at all, with the latency of the Zoom's visual image being greater than the latency of Jamless's audio. Rhythmic information is much better given audibly, if at all, for example, with clapping. The conductor can do a lot, though. You can show dynamics, you can cue entrances. I like to use designated corners of the screen for sections, remembering that your left may not be the same as the singer's left. So when someone asks which corner is the alto corner, I always demonstrate rather than telling them it's bottom right. What else? Oh, conductors, make sure to keep an eye on your own video so you stay in the frame. It's a very small box that you have to work with, which may be very different if you are used to spreading your arms wide when you're conducting. So it's really like learning a new instrument, learning to sing together online in a live remote way. And if you think of it that way, then it becomes less of a frustration and more of an excitement that, ooh, I get to learn something new. I get to learn how to sing in this completely new way. So one of the first things for learning this new instrument is learning to monitor your own levels as a singer. So on the left, you see 3 images of the Jamulus input monitor. I always have that visible somewhere on my desktop when I am singing, because I have to know, on the left, you see that I'm barely being heard, which is fine if I'm meaning to sing pianissimo, but maybe not so great if that's not the effect I want. The middle one is ideal, and on the right, we have the red showing that I'm actually clipping and causing a problem. So I would need to step back for the microphone. On the right, you have the window for the settings, for audio settings in Zoom. So Jamless has a very nice interface for monitoring your own levels, but every program has something. And if the program doesn't have its own interface for monitoring your levels, your computer does. You can always pull up your computer's audio settings and look at that to see where your input level is at. So in this image here, you see the input level is in a good range above the midway point and not all the way to the right, which would indicate maybe a little too hot. So the flip side of that is listening to others. Make sure you can hear everyone. And this image shows the mixing board in Jamulus, where you can adjust everything as you want it for your own benefit. This could mean that one singer who is not so confident about the pitches might choose to have other people in their voice part higher than others. In a way, it's really exciting that you can choose as an individual singer whether to be mixed equally among your peers in the choir, or to be standing with your section virtually by hearing your own section louder than others. What you see here in this image is that I was following in this rehearsal a singer named Angela, who was the leader for our section using the technique I described earlier. Next, we want to create a comfortable screen space. So you see this is a snapshot from a rehearsal. We were rehearsing a piece called Dawn by Chris Flood. And you see in the bottom left, my Jamulus input monitor that is always visible. And then on the right, I have positioned the conductor, Perry Townsend, visible, and the rest of the choir is mostly hidden above. So that's the Zoom window behind my score window. And I think behind that is the input monitor for my computer. So this is just how I do it. You have to find something that's comfortable for you. I have a very large screen, so I'm able to have everything be visible. If you have a smaller screen, you might want to print your music or put it on a tablet. But you just have to find something that's comfortable for you, because it does affect the rehearsal. It's kind of the equivalent of telling all the singers to find a window. Make sure you can see the conductor so you can have an effective rehearsal. Well, make sure the singers have found a way to see everything that they need to have an effective rehearsal.
All right, so I wanted to include this slide to kind of give you a paradigm for thinking about how your singers should approach the live stream, which is zooming versus performing. It's easy when you're sitting at your computer looking at a Zoom call on the screen to fall into the usual bad habits you have at the office. When you do that all day while working, it just gives you a backache at the end of the day. But if you do it while trying to sing, it's a lot worse. It's very hard to produce good sound while you're slouched at a computer, and it doesn't look very good to the audience either. So singers in a live stream need to put on their singing caps. All the things that you would think about in a concert are just as important with a live stream. Good posture, breath support, watching the conductor. It helps if you can stand up while you're singing to remind yourself that you're actually up on stage performing in a way. Now, some singers, including many of us in C4, weren't really used to singing into a microphone, so that there are additional things that you didn't have to think about before. The proper distance from the microphone, depending upon the volume, avoiding breath pops, making sure not to breathe while you're facing directly into the microphone. Now, even worse, when you have the headphones, it makes it really hard to hear yourself, as Karen was talking about, and the ensemble sound is a lot more difficult to find your place in. So just staying on pitch becomes difficult, as she said. So it's very important for all the singers to picture themselves not as a participant slouched on the Zoom call, but as a choral artist in a fancy studio recording a CD. You need to bring your A game, both as a singer and a studio musician, producing the dynamics and phrasing that the music is calling for without relying on everyone around you to subtly remind you when there's a subito piano or something like that. You have to take ownership and sing the music as an individual. Sounds very challenging, and it can be, but it can also be kind of invigorating and empowering. Once we adjusted our setup to allow us to sing better and went through the details of microphone technique with some people who knew what they were talking about, at least I found the live stream experience became a lot more rewarding. And for the audience, it was probably a lot more rewarding as well. All of us are starved right now for the live musical experience. And with the right mindset, the live stream performance can capture a lot of the feeling of being on stage performing to an audience.
So something that we really found as we were trying to go through this process with my university students is that rehearsing feels very different and becomes very experimental. That we spend a lot of time trying to troubleshoot and figure out technology, but also to see what worked as an ensemble, because we had to learn what it was like to sing in this new space. So I think it's incredibly important that if you're imagining taking on a project like this, that you leave time for tech. We've already mentioned that having individual tech appointments with each of your singers to make sure that they have the best setup they possibly can make a really, really huge difference. But you're going to need that space and time to save you time when everyone is together. It's like, make sure you know your part before you come in the rehearsal, or like, please bring your music. Like, you need to have your levels checked and make sure that your equipment is as good as it possibly can be. The other thing is that you need to know that early on in the process, while you're getting familiar with this kind of work, you're definitely going to be in a situation where you're going to need time in those initial rehearsal processes to troubleshoot some of the tech issues that you're having. So build that into your understanding. Here you can see in the first rehearsal, imagine at least 45 minutes of tech setup, 10 to 15 by the time you're getting to the fifth rehearsal, that mostly people are figuring out how to do it. They know what the routine is. It's just like when you start an academic year and your students come in and they don't know what the routine is for how they get their music, how they stand, how they begin warm-ups. The same thing is true when you're rehearsing in this kind of space. Checking levels can be like part of the new warm-up procedure, right? That we go through and we hear every individual singer, or we all sing together and look at the levels. And then you want to make sure that you're addressing those individual problems in between rehearsals. So if someone's really, not sounding great, then you're going to want to make sure that you meet up with them afterwards and say, hey, come by my office hours. Let's check your setup and see what we can do to fix it. I'll mention here that we've talked about this a little bit, that there are other tech possibilities. One thing that I really want to point out the difference between is I have a lot of colleagues who are using Jam-Kazam, and that is also a great online audio collaboration tool for low latency singing. The difference is that that's a peer-to-peer system versus a centralized server, which is what Jamulus does. What that means in a very brief description is that a centralized server, everyone's connecting to one computer that is somewhere. Like mine was in Arizona when we were doing our concert, and it enabled people from all over the country to connect to that one thing, and then they all had their own amount of latency to that server. When you connect peer-to-peer, all of your computers are linking up like a chain. And if you have a particular person who has really high latency or a really slow internet connection, that can hurt everybody's connection, where a centralized server sort of will be great for those who it's great for and less great for those for whom it isn't. And that's how to just mention something that was written in the chat about if you don't have an ideal tech setup, that's how we manage some of the challenges that we had by not having everyone on Wi-Fi and everyone with good microphones, was that by having a centralized server, people with less good connections could sort of deal with their own tech challenges, but we had many people who had much better connections and we could make the most out of it. There are other great softwares that you can look up. We've listed this in our resource document, but SoundJack, Jack Trip, which is something out of Stanford, and there's a couple of other things that are even currently in development.
While Karen is muted, I'll just mention...
You're supposed to go first anyway, Daniel.
Oh, okay, yeah. So on the list here is Segura, which is a Jamulus fork, which has some additional features. And one thing I wanted to mention, which will come up when Karen talks about clean feed, is that in principle that list of desiderata that I had of no sound processing to get in the way and high quality sound is in principle not that difficult to get, even with web browser based solutions. And so I think I've been trying to adapt existing open source web browser based solutions just by making sure that it doesn't get in the way. And I think we'll see perhaps more of that sort of thing coming along. Sorry, Karen, over to you.
No problem. So clean feed is not new, but it's relatively new to me, and I'm getting to know it. It is a really nice option for a small choir that it's 32 people maximum, and it is browser based. It's very easy to use. It doesn't have all of the bells and whistles of Jamulus, but for the ease of use balanced with a true to its name, clean sound, I would really recommend it for a small choir that wants something relatively easy. Someone was asking in the chat about, well, what about a church choir with a lot of older singers? Jamulus might not be a good fit for choirs with people who are a little nervous about using technology. You can just use Zoom. It is the most accessible option. It is not ideal. The sound has some limitations, but it is very easy. And using the original sound option in Zoom, it allows for dynamics and overtones to be heard. There is still some highlighting of individual voices that can't be turned off. But it is very appealing to choirs with members who are scared of doing something like Jamulus. And right now, it's the only option that I know of for over 50 people to be accommodated. One thing I forgot to say about Clean Feed is that with the Pro version, you actually can, as the host, adjust the participants' levels for them. So you can have an audio engineer create a performance mix. So that's maybe the reason that you might consider using the pro version rather than the clean version of CleanFeed. There's also some time that's needed for the host of the session to set up the session by individually inviting each singer. So that's a little bit of a pain for the host, but for the user, for the singer, it's a very easy experience to use CleanFeed, which is also audio only. So you would probably want to use something like Zoom in conjunction.
So we've come to the question portion of our webinar, and I just want to first shout out to several people in the chat who have just been doing an amazing job answering people's questions as they come up. I know I've been trying to jump in and be able to talk to people as well, but there were certainly a couple of larger topics that came up as we were going through the webinar that I wanted to pitch to our panelists and just see if we could get some responses. Just recently, I answered this in the chat as well, but to make it very clear, when we're talking about singing together over the internet, there are low latency and sort of normal latency options. Zoom, there's a tremendous delay between singers. That same is true for CleanFeed. It's not a low latency solution, so it's like the audio lag on Zoom, but the audio quality is much better, especially with overlapping voices and multiple people singing at the same time. Things like Jamulus and Jamkazam are built to make music over the internet in as low latency a situation as possible. So if you're looking for something that feels more like live music making, those are the things that you have to do, but they involve a greater amount of tech setup. And so I think there are ways for everyone at all levels to try to make music live over the internet together with their ensembles. And if you have a group of people who are tech savvy or at least not like completely tech paralyzed, with all the resources C4 in particular has put together, you can make it work. You can make it work. Even with a community or a church choir, if you've got people who have the buy-in, I think you can absolutely do it. But there's also easier solutions if you want to get your feet wet and try and then say, well, that was cool. Maybe we could try Jamulus, even with a small group. One question that came up is asking if this could, we're all doing this in a choral space, but do we think that this could be adapted for voice lessons or for other, instrumental online teaching or one-on-one kind of instruction? I don't know if any of the panelists other than me want to respond to that.
I do know someone whose whole department is using CleanFeed for voice lessons. So that is certainly being done, and it seems to be going well. Yeah.
And I think you could absolutely use Jamulus if you have students who want to do the tech setup with it. And the same is true with Jamkazam, which I know that's like some universities like University of Maryland are planning on doing for their music majors. So there are those solutions that are out there. One question that came up a couple of times is about copyright and how we deal with those issues when we're talking about streaming live concerts over the internet. Do any of you want to tackle that or point people in the direction of another resource that's not us?
I do have a resource to point people to, which is if you can get a hold of the Chorus America panel that was given by Abby Bettinas and another person whose name is escaping me at the moment. That was very valuable. I learned a lot from that. Just keep in mind that there are licensing, streaming licenses that are needed. And if you're working with independent composers, you should talk to them about that. Some people think that YouTube takes care of all the streaming licenses for you, and I found out from that seminar that is only the case for the really big recording companies, and publishing companies. Smaller publishing companies are not going to be covered by that.
Awesome. Thanks, Karen. James asks whether when we did our live concerts, people were spread out across the country or they were relatively similarly located geographically. And I can tell you for SCU, we have students from all over the country. So we had people from California to New York. And that was one of the reasons why we chose to go with Jamulus, a centralized server, because we knew that the distance would be a challenge. For C4, do you all want to speak about your geographic spread?
Sure, I can take this. So we have an interesting situation in that our live streams have been mostly evenly split between C4 members and members of the Inversion Ensemble, which is an Austin, Texas-based new music chorus, just like C4 is. So we, and then we have some people in LA and a few scattered in other places. I think we're all in the United States. It turns out that the server that we are running, which is on Google Cloud, the data center that was provided to us is in Virginia or North Carolina or something like that. So it's actually kind of halfway. Well, it's closer to New York, as we can tell from the latency figures, but it's sort of on the path between Texas and New York. So that, but you can definitely see when you look at people's latency numbers, you can see that the people in Texas are clustered a little higher on the latency spectrum. So the geographical distance does have an effect. It's not actually as big an effect as if you're using Wi-Fi sometimes. I wouldn't be surprised if someone in the next state using Wi-Fi would have more latency than someone halfway across the country who had a good wired connection, but it definitely is something to consider.
Awesome, thank you. One question was how does one go about getting a Jamulus server? And someone asked me specifically that question, which is awesome because I just looked at the C4 documents to figure out how to do that and went through the step-by-step instructions and set myself up with a Google Cloud Platform server. And I felt super accomplished when I entered things like sudo into a command line. It just made me feel so cool. But there are lots of like cloud-based server systems. You can also download the software onto a computer and run it personally, but the tech gurus are here to probably answer this any much better than I can. Anything people should be looking at in particular when they're looking to get a server?
I don't know if you want to answer, Daniel. I can take a stab if you want.
Sure. Yeah, I'm trying to think of anything specific, but
well,
go
so
ahead. Yeah.
As Scott said, there are sort of two main options. You can run it on your own local computer, or you can run it in the cloud somewhere. In theory, you can just run it on your normal computer. We did have some problems trying to run the server and the normal client on the same computer. That caused some problems. But if you had, for instance, a desktop and a laptop computer, you could run the server on the desktop and then everyone could connect to it, and then you have your laptop. That has the advantage that you don't have to pay any money for a cloud server, and you anyway will have lickety-split low latency because your signal is just going across the apartment. And if other people are in the same neighborhood as you, it might be that they have good latency, although we found that is not always the case. The flip side is the server goes down if your computer crashes, or if you overload it because your email program goes haywire. If you put your computer to sleep for the night, then all of a sudden everyone's server connection goes away. So, and it relies upon someone having a really good internet connection. So if none of the people in the group has a super stellar internet connection, then it might be better to consider a cloud option where what you're doing is renting space on a server somewhere in a data center and then running the same software there. And then you have a better internet connection, you have a more reliable server. Of course, you get what you pay for. You have to pay them the monthly fee for use of the cloud server.
Great, thanks. That's really helpful. Daniel, anything to add?
No, that's everything.
Awesome. A couple of quick things, and then I'll turn some more questions to our panel. Just to note that a couple of people asked about examples of what these live concerts look like. We've done one at SCU. We're going to do another one in the fall because we're going to be all online. C4 has done 3 now. I think I'm getting that correct. And it has another one coming very soon. And we've linked all of those in the resource document. So you can check that out, or you can just Google C4 or SCU choirs, and you can find those things on YouTube archived. The chat of our live stream should also be archived alongside the live stream video. So because there's so many smart things that have been said in the chat, if you want to go back and relive this incredible experience of watching us speak into the void, you can do that and see what people had to say about it. Someone asked if I consider myself tech savvy. Yes, but dangerously so. My choice for when we did this live concert was that I did the conducting, the audio and video management. I was running the live stream. I was like hosting the Zoom call, giving pitches, switching scenes, and don't do that. It's a bad idea. If you can find somebody in your ensemble who is at least tech interested, and you can work with them to set this up, or even not in your ensemble, because ideally they're not going to be a singer. They're going to be able to just keep track of what's happening with the technology, then have them help you, because distributing this task is so important. I'm so excited that for next year, our production team that would normally be running live in-person concerts is going to be helping me manage the live stream and the tech setup of this. And I can't tell you how much happier I feel in my life after hearing those words come from my production manager. Someone asked about the costs for singers. They're minimal in terms of like the software because it's all free, but they are not minimal in terms of like the audio setup. If you want a really good microphone, USB mics for $100 to $150, you can get some pretty good ones that have the audio device plugged in. So a couple people mentioned Focusrite Scarlett. That's a pretty popular 1 or 2 input audio device. But the biggest thing you can do, and I don't think we could stress this enough, is get an Ethernet cable that you can plug into your computer. And like my Mac laptop doesn't have that anymore, so I had to get a dongle, which is a word that hurts my soul to say out loud in any context. But that $29 that you spend on that dongle will get you the best audio quality of any of those tools. Karen?
I just want to add about the Ethernet cable. I needed a super long one, 100 feet. I think got it for about $25. So the essentials is $50 to $60 to get that dongle and the Ethernet cable. Everything else beyond that is gravy. If you don't have a good external mic, that's okay. You can still participate. And I think of it like if someone has a bad mic, it's kind of like having a weak singer in your choir. They can still participate. They can be carried by the stronger singers in the choir. They have a good experience and they can contribute something. So it's okay. I would never say to anyone that you should not participate in it because you don't have a microphone or purchasing a microphone is outside of your budget.
While you're talking, Karen, do you want to talk about whether or not you can use this for live instruments as well? We've talked a lot about singing, but like, what if you want a pianist to join in or an organist, for instance?
Well, we have performed with synthesizer, organ sound, and we have also performed with flute. So it works fine in our experience with instruments. I have not heard yet of a large ensemble using it, but I don't see why not. I think the limitations on size for instruments are going to be the same on the limitations on size, same as limitations on size for singers. It's a matter of the server and the data. So it might be a little harder to balance the instruments. They'd have to figure out, what's the right microphone technique for a saxophone. I don't know, beats me, but I'm sure you could figure it out. And it's not like using amplification is brand new to instrumentalists.
Absolutely. Someone asked a clarifying question. The dongle is a USB Ethernet connection. It depends. Like on my Mac, it plugs into the Lightning port. But the biggest thing is you just need to make sure whatever computer people are using, that it has the capability to be able to be plugged into hard Ethernet, that like Cat5 cable that I had running across my apartment in college. And I still had it, the 150-foot one, and I was so glad I did. Thank you, not throwing things away. It's super useful. Someone, go ahead, Karen.
So someone suggested gaming headsets in the chats, and I don't know if you've seen, but there's someone who's on the ACDA resources page. Someone was putting videos of a whole great setup made all with in gaming technology, gaming headsets, gaming connections. I don't know the right words for it. I'm not a
Although
gamer, but
I'm,
it can work.
I don't know much about gaming headsets, but I'm sort of assuming they might have a built-in microphone. And that's one thing you don't want is a built-in microphone, because then you can't get far enough away from the microphone. And in fact, strangely, a lot of singers in our ensemble didn't have headphones that didn't also have a microphone. You just need the old school headphones that have nothing but headphones and no mic. And then you use the built-in microphone on your computer and it works fine. But if you have the one where the microphone is right here, and then I were to sing a really loud note, it wouldn't be pretty no matter what, because I'm not that good a singer. But especially with this thing, it wouldn't be very good. So you do have to be a little careful, but it doesn't really cost you any more money to find one of those old pairs of headphones, something that you got on a plane trip or something, one of those cheapo ones that they give out. That will do fine.
Similarly, I found that I was unable to use my Bluetooth headphones with Jamulus.
Yeah.
Sometimes having too many different parts is not good. Simpler connections are better.
Yeah, I would say 90% of the issues that Santa Clara had was people using AirPods. That like they could not get the AirPod to configure correctly with Jamulus, and the minute they dug out from their closet some really old, terrible headphones, everything was fixed for them, and it was just amazing. So, like in some ways, the low tech of like I can just plug this into my computer and it does the one task is really, really useful.
Yeah, Bluetooth headsets seem appealing, but they add a very considerable lag. Far more than far more in fact than is just present from using the Jamulus or the software, so it kind of defeats the purpose.
I'm trying to see if I'm noticing any other burning questions here in the chat. I'll give people just another moment if they want to smash any ideas. Oh, is that Brian?
I was going to say one thing that when you were talking about the watching the recordings of our live streams, that made me want to say that you should watch a little bit of each one of them, because that will inspire you with how it's possible to get better. Because I have the feeling like from our first to our second to our third, it's not like we were any better singers, but learning to use the medium better, we got a lot more mileage, and I think put on a better performance as we went along. So just all these little things we've been talking about, it's surprising how you have to relearn a bunch of things, but once you do it, you can get there. So don't be discouraged if you try the first time and you think this sounds beneath our ensemble's capabilities or whatever. You can make it work.
Yeah, and check out the different pieces, like because we experiment with different styles of pieces, but also the different ways of synchronizing the singers, like Karen was saying. So each piece is very different, so maybe you'll find something that is very much to your liking.
We have another question about servers, and is like on Google Cloud Platform, is opting for a more expensive server going to get you better results for your Jamulus sessions?
Not probably no. The overhead. What do you mean by more expensive? More CPU, more RAM? Even the most basic setups are enough for audio processing of 20 people. We found when we had 20 people, the server was not half loaded, so that won't get you anything more. The internet speed is more or less the same. Like you cannot. There's not very much choice there. So I would say no. The standard server is fine for almost all your needs if you're just using Jamulus and an audio setup. If you do end up having 50 people, maybe you're going to have to beef up the server a little bit. But until then, I think your standard server is fine.
Great, thanks. A
We
couple of,
also got,
oh, sorry,
I'm sorry, I was
Brian,
just
go
going to
ahead.
say, we did get a little more disk space, right, Daniel? So we like to record our sessions so that we can go back and listen to things and figure out what to improve. And in order to avoid having to keep deleting things to free up space and all that, I think, Daniel, you got some extra disk space.
Yeah, the minimum is 500 gigs, so we got that. Um, this is perhaps too much detail, but if someone wants to get in touch with me later, we can talk about it. We found that the premium networking Google offers reduces the latency, but was introducing some artifacts into our Jamulus sound, and so for now we've switched that off, which reduces the cost. But we can, if whoever is interested in this, can get in touch with us.
If I can circle back to Ethan's question about examples for the different types of live stream performances, right now, Santa Clara University and C4 have only done Jamulus performances, and we've talked about other options, but as far as I know, you can listen to something by Sacred and Profane did not quite live, but they did a Zoom rehearsal and recorded it, and then streamed that in as a pre-recorded live concert. So it's still you can still get the same result in what it sounds like, even if it wasn't a true live stream. So you could check that out for Zoom. A bunch of choirs that I'm working with are planning to do something with Zoom or Clean Feed, but I don't think any of them have performance dates yet. I'll just give a quick plug that I am organizing a commissioning consortium for a new work for live remote choir that's referenced in the resources sheet, if that's something that might be of interest to you. So hopefully there will be more performances coming out with these different methods and different platforms. Someone also mentioned some brand new things coming out that aren't on our technology list, and I think that there will be more and more of these options coming out. Experiment with them.
We had a couple of other questions. One about like huge choirs, like a Texas All-State or something like that. My understanding is the limit right now is probably around 50 for Jamulus, but you all with a little bit more tech knowledge can correct me if I'm wrong. We had 26 in our server and it worked well. And just for the record, we bought the cheapest Google Cloud platform server we possibly could, and it was all right. But I don't know. Do you all know that there's a hard cap?
So, well, first of all, I was looking at the source code this morning, and it looked like 100 is now the theoretical limit, although things might give out when you got that far. But I was I tuned in. There's a thing called the Jamulus Choir, which I think is based primarily in Europe, and they're trying to do choral singing via Jamulus as well. And they did a thing where they had a bunch of Jamulus servers interconnected somehow, trying to see if they could get like 100 people connected, and each like 25 people connected to this server, this server, this server, this server, and then each of the servers was connected to each other. So I think the jury was out on that, but it may be possible through creativity to get some complicated setup that could handle a really huge number of people. And it didn't actually require any more work on the part of the singer. They said, here, go to the bass server. So I went to the bass server, and then there's a tenor server, and then someone had the unenviable task of going through beforehand and connecting all those things together. So it might be possible if you're ambitious.
Hey Brian, how did it sound?
It sounded all right, but we didn't have that many people. I mean, we proved that this cross-connect technology could work, but I think there were only like 30 people total, so we probably could have just done it on a regular Jamulus thing too. But it sounded fine.
And I was going to say, this is the sort of thing.
We sang, I can't remember. We were trotting out all the warm, fuzzy songs to sing.
And this is the sort of thing that Jack Tripp could, in principle, handle at some cost to latency, but it's the scale up.
Yes, you could, if you wanted to do a more do-it-yourself kind of thing, you could probably organize having some monster server in the center with a separate jack trip connection for 100 people. And actually, like, since you were mentioning this in academic context and you were talking about your production crew, that could be something that if you had a university whose production crew was casting about for things to do and ways to use the technology, that might be some interesting task for them to tackle, would be to set up, to look at, I think Stanford uses Jack Trip to connect a whole bunch of people to their central thing. And they could look at what they've done and figure out how to replicate it. And as you were saying, assemble a team that could make it possible for all the singers to do what they want.
I think you have to keep in mind, though, that the more people you have connected, the more opportunities there are for something to go wrong and for noise to be introduced into the system. So there's a difference between what's theoretically possible and what's feasible. With the larger groups, it's going to get tricky.
And I do want to emphasize that if everyone is using, a microphone and is sitting, a few inches from their microphone, and there are 100 of you, the chance of you're hearing all those 100 people live next to your ear. So the chance of some kind of noise, it's not like the I'm a bass, it's not like the sopranos are at the other end of the room, and if they chat, I can't hear it. Everything is audible to everyone. So there's a social scaling issue as well.
But there's less chatting in rehearsal.
True. We have, I think, just two other things before we want to wrap up. We're conscious of everyone's time, and we want to thank you for your incredible attention and all your fantastic questions. There's a question about what about blind singers and the accessibility of Jamulus? And I'm not sure how it interacts with the screen reader. So I don't know if any of you have experience with that.
Accessibility came up on a rehearsal that I was listening in on where they were using Zoom, and for not just for blindness, but for singers who have disabilities and have trouble with the mute button and muting and unmuting themselves in Zoom, that was an issue. Clean feed would be a better option for helping singers who can't do those things themselves, because the host, if you have the pro version, the host can adjust a singer's levels for them, including muting or unmuting them. So that might be something that would be helpful for a blind singer, that the host could do it for them. Unfortunately, I don't think these platforms are thinking enough about accessibility.
I think it also brings up a larger point about inequity in access, because the choral instrument is a great equalizer in society. We have voices that we're born with, and we can use them to collaborate with each other, but we don't all have high quality fast internet and good audio technology and a computer that can handle doing these tasks. And so there's an inequality in terms of access. I certainly had students who didn't feel like they were able to fully participate in my performance because they didn't feel like they had a home situation that allowed them to be able to make music, or they didn't have access to the technology to be able to do it, or the time because of other concerns. And I think whenever you're imagining a process in this current environment in particular, where people are operating remotely and often from their home living situation, we need to have great compassion and understanding for what people are living as a part of and what that means in terms of their ability to collaborate with us in a musical way. A lot of times music can be a place to escape and to go and to be in a place that's safe and wonderful. And we're now asking them to often do that in a space that may not feel that way, or that they don't have the tools to be able to collaborate with us in the ways that they want to. And so this quarter at our university, we're going to try to be sending students the technology that they need to be able to fully participate as much as we possibly can. But I think that that's something that we really need to think about the longer this pandemic goes on, is that access to high-speed internet, to a safe and quiet location to be able to perform, to audio technology that allows people to do it well, is part of the bar that we have to meet to provide people access. And finally, I want to specifically plug C4's next concert, which if I've read correctly in the chat, it's August 27th at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And so you can find that on their YouTube page. I'm sure it's also linked on their website. And I just want to thank Karen and Daniel and Brian for hanging out with me for the past several months as we chatted about our experience doing this kind of music making. And I want to thank everyone in the chat who joined us. If this was useful to you or sparked your interest to know that there are people really trying to innovate and make the best out of a challenging situation, just know you're not alone in this and that we're all in this together and that we can still make music together live. So if you have further questions, please feel free to reach out to us over email. We'll be posting a link to a sort of sanitized version of our slides without all of our terrible notes in it in the description of this YouTube video shortly. And it's just been a delight to get to share this virtual stage with these fantastic people. So thank you all so much, and we hope to see you at one of our live concerts soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.